This is Bam Electric Coast. We're live on the air with Monica Kaufman. You're a financial professional, and
Yes,
we're going to talk about building financial defense first. And I want to thank you for being on the show today. How you doing?
I'm well. Thank you for having me.
A couple of questions before we get into your story that we ask any podcast guest. What motivates you, and why do you do what you do?
So, on a personal level, I am married to someone who's had some very major medical challenges. And because of that, it has brought to mind to me w- the power of what money is and the power of real financial planning. Many, many years ago, I had somebody sit down with me. And when we realized that my husband had some medical issues, we got a life insurance policy. And when he was at his worst, what allowed me to go to sleep at night was the thought that if something happened and he didn't pull through, that we had that, that the kids and I had that, and that it was there. And when I went into financial planning and financial advisory about 20 years ago, I started to really understand the power of money as a tool, really just a set of tools in my hands. And the question was, what was I using it to build? And then what was I using it to protect? And so that's part of what drives me. I understand what it is to feel vulnerable, and I understand what it is. And I've watched people, I've had the privilege of watching people use money appropriately, but also trying to help people who wind up for a variety of reasons pretty vulnerable because they didn't prepare. They didn't build some defenses along the way.
Yeah, so it's a good, like you found a way to kind of look at your life and then kind of have a teaching moment for other people. And that's part of your career is you help people actually build financial defenses. That's what we're talking about, right?
Right. So one of the things I discovered, especially in during the shutdown, it became very clear to me was that a lot of people really failed to make a transition. They failed to make the transition from earning money to creating wealth. Okay. And let's be blunt, financial freedom has nothing to do with earning money. Honestly, what it really has to do with is to become financially free, you have to focus and learn everything about money after or beyond earning the income. And so the question that I ask people is, what are you doing? What are you building? How are you using your financial tools? I can tell you a lot of what's going on inside of you based on what you do with your money.
Hmm.
So my commitment once the shutdown became so severe and watching people go into panic was to help people build another way, to help people shift their relationship with money. And you have to decide in your head, you have to make a decision that you're going to pursue financial freedom, that maybe the patterns you inherited and that you learned from your family that have been going on for generations, that you needed to make a shift, that these were no longer serving you. And maybe they didn't in the past, and that it's no one's fault, it's in the past. But what are you going to do stepping forward today?
Yeah, it's so hard to know, what's the right strategy because there's so many people out there that, there's all kinds of new techniques. We have the stock market, you have crypto, you have real estate, you have all these things. And then, there's a lot of scammers.
Right.
And so, people, I've gone through, like the 2008 crash. There
Mhm.
was like some crashes before that, and I had I had an uncle who was worked for AT&T, and he had a very aggressive stock portfolio, and the 2008 thing like wrecked him. And he
Okay.
thought he was being smart because he wasn't retiring for another 10 or 15 years. So sometimes you can have a strategy, but then things can go awry.
Right. And so one of the things that I tell people, I'm a certified financial planner. And one of the things I tell people is that the investments part of the discussion is really the last part of the discussion. So let's talk first about some of the financial defenses. And one of the things that I'll say to people is if you can't afford to not work, then the first thing we need to do is to say, do you have disability insurance? Disability insurance replaces the income should you be unable to work through no fault of your own. And if it's done correctly, let's say it's done through an employer, if it's done on an after tax basis, you pay a little bit of money for your premium because through an employer, you're getting an incredible group rate. And what happens is that if by chance you have to use that policy proceed, it comes to you tax free and it may replace 60 to 70% of your income. Well, it's a heck of a lot easier to concentrate on getting better if you don't have to worry about your income, you're able to pay your bills. So that's one of the first financial defenses. I've worked with people who have said, look, I'm not really sure what's going on. My employer doesn't really cover this, or the coverage is really spotty, and they've bought a policy. Why? Because even though it's a little more expensive, they own the policy and they can take it anywhere and they don't have to worry about that. So that's the first defense. The second defense that I've said to people is, okay, so we all know what an emergency fund is. That's great. Well, let's talk about some of the things that an emergency fund might have to cover. So if, God forbid, you get into a car accident and you have a deductible on the car, you have to cover that deductible to start dealing with and replacing the car or repairing the car. If you are not properly covered with your car insurance and you don't have enough coverage and you have a lawsuit, then it becomes another problem. And I'll go one further. I had somebody that I was working with whose ex-wife had a daughter that had some mental health challenges, but also had a drug addiction. And not only did she get into a car accident where she totaled a car, but then a couple weeks later got arrested, and she had bought something she shouldn't have had it in the car with her. So when it came down to it, the insurance coverage, because the ex-wife had cut back on the coverage, removed the umbrella, went to a much lower coverage to save money, she's got a real financial problem and she's in her late 50s. That's
Yes.
not a very comfortable place to be, because her daughter's decision sent a family of four to the hospital.
Yeah, I think a lot
Again,
of people, yeah. I mean, just to interject, it's like I think a lot of people look at like their monthly budget
yep,
and maybe just think like pie in the sky. I don't need the uninsured coverage. I don't need this coverage. I don't need that coverage. And they never think about, or they go for the high deductible insurance, right? And
right.
then they end up with cancer,
Yeah,
right? And then they end up having to pay a $10,000 deductible that they don't have.
right. And so that's part of the problem. That's
Yeah.
another part of the problem. You really have to look at it from that perspective. And the younger you are when you start this conversation, the better off you are. Because, for example, if you're young and you're healthy and you don't have anything in your immediate horizon, and you can afford to start putting money into the HSA and aggressively putting it in, okay, within 10, 15 years, when things statistically might start to happen, you've already got an emergency fund set up for medical issues. So that's something else that I'd like to see people take advantage of. That's another financial defense. If you have medical issues as the number one reason why people wind up having a disability event, and we have a 70% chance of having a disability event in our lifetimes. Okay. So that is the thing you're most likely to have. You're more likely to have that issue than to die and have your family or your heirs collect the
Yeah,
proceeds
you'll
of
be
the life insurance.
disabled and maybe not have coverage and you don't have short-term or
Correct.
long-term disability. You didn't think to go get the extra coverage.
Right.
Like one thing that happened to us, like in New Hampshire, when we didn't have earthquake insurance. We got a brand new house and then there was like a 1.5 earthquake. And I said, oh, didn't do anything, but I immediately went by coverage for the house. And I
Wow.
went
The
and
warning
read.
shot across the bow, right?
Yeah, because I went and read, like, if you have an earthquake and you don't have the earthquake insurance and your house gets damaged, like the foundation, they don't cover it. Your
That's a
homeowners doesn't
nightmare.
cover it. And the
That's a
thing
nightmare.
is, like, yeah, in the 1950s, there was a 5.6 in Manchester, knocked houses off their foundation. Insurance companies didn't pay anything.
Wow.
So a
I
lot
had
of
a
people
young
don't think about that.
I had a young lady who was sent to me. She was in a car accident, not her fault, uninsured motorist, okay? And she didn't have disability through work. She didn't pay for it. And her parents, she really didn't want to go home. There were some issues and she didn't want to go home. She had no choice. It was that or not have a place to live. That's a rough place to be. You don't want that. The one thing that I used to say to people is go and price out what long-term disability is through work if your employer offers it. And the reason why I tell them that is like, look, you may discover that for the cost of one adult beverage per pay period, you could replace a large percentage of your income. Are you willing to give up one adult beverage per pay
Yeah,
period? And I said
yeah.
to a couple of young professionals at one point, and they laughed at me. And then they called me back and said, oh, it's not one adult beverage. And I thought, oh no, it's going to be a lot higher. They're going to complain. No, it was one Starbucks beverage for a date. Okay. So
We
it
need
was
to give that up.
significantly less. It was a fraction of that. So of
Yeah,
course they bought it. But again, it's one of those things that if your employer offers it, and
that's a
here's the best
no-brainer.
part of it, if it's done correctly, the employer doesn't pay for it. Why do you want to pay for it? Because if you pay for it, when you get the proceeds, it comes to you without taxes. That's something else about insurance. Okay. Insurance depends on how you pay for it. If I pay for it with pre-tax money, if I'm trying to take a deduction, or if I let my employer pay for something like this, then I'm going to be taxed on the proceeds. Health insurance is different. But for everything else, that's the way that works. So if your employer pays for your life insurance and you think your heirs get, let's say $1 million, no, it's $1 million after taxes. It's taxable.
Oh, so
You
the
pay for
employer,
it,
so they're
okay?
saying short-term, long-term, and life insurance through your employer is taxable.
Well, if you get it through your employer, but you pay the premium,
Yeah, I paid if the premium is like in my payroll deduction, that's my premium, even
yep.
if they pay a part of it.
Well, it depends. It depends. With life insurance, there's a certain rule on that, and there's a limitation, and it's about $50,000. That's a little bit different. Okay. But if you're paying the premium and you're paying with taxable money, would you rather pay, let's say, $20 a month for long-term disability insurance through your employer? Okay. And then if God forbid you need to take the premium, take the policy proceeds and not be taxed on it, don't you think that's a better investment? Don't you think that's a better decision? I don't want to call you
Mhm.
the word investment. Okay. And so that's one thing that I look for. All right. That's something. It's like, look, if you have the option to pay tax on the insurance premium, do so, because then the policy proceeds come to you or your heirs, okay, without taxes. And that's another thing that I really want people to start thinking about. Your return is not your return until after the taxes are paid, if
Yeah,
there
you
are
gotta think
taxes.
about the taxes.
Yeah. So every decision you make, you really have to really be cognizant of what that real return is or what that real coverage is. So another thing that I had a conversation with a woman recently, and she had some damage to her house, and it was a slab leak, which apparently happens quite a bit where I live, and it was a $40,000 bill. Well, the deductible on homeowners insurance has gotten to the point where it's about 5%. You have a house that's $800,000, that's $40,000 on deductible before the insurance company is going to pay.
Yeah, that's kind of hidden. People don't probably realize that.
Right. So one of the things I'll tell people when they're ready to buy a house is it's not just the mortgage payment. It's not just your taxes on it, property taxes on it. You need to think about that. It's the cost of owning it. And so one of the things that affects it is the ownership, is the insurance premium you'll have to pay plus the deductible should something happen. Okay.
Yeah,
One of the things that a lot of people also have when they're looking at this is they don't look at their homeowner's insurance and how that shifts through time. Because as the value of the property goes up, so does your deductible.
oh, it's like
Okay.
people don't read because they send you like 50 pages worth of every time it renews.
Right. And
Gives
so
you
that's
50
one of
pages. It's kind of so you don't
right.
read it.
So one of the things that I tell people is it's like, look, we have to read these things. We have to look for the highlights. And usually there's a declarations page that's going to give you the highlights. That first page, first 1 or 2 pages is going to give you the highlights and the pieces that we need to look for. Okay. What is your premium? What is your deductible? And then what are your exclusions and what's the max coverage that you're going to have? And it's the same thing with health insurance. So you have a premium that you have to pay. okay, or that you contribute. Usually, most employers don't cover it entirely. Then you have a deductible. Then you have a copay or coinsurance where you're contributing. And then you have an out of pocket maximum. And if it's not just you, it's your family, you have to take that into account. How is that out of pocket maximum
Yeah,
calculated?
they've been going. That's the thing about that. I try to, let people know is like over time, been working since 1993. In 1993, my insurance policy through work covered way more than what it covers now. And I
Exactly.
paid a lot less for it than I pay
Correct.
now.
Correct.
That the employer's so-called benefits have shifted radically toward the employee. So when they tell you you have benefits compared to when I was working in 94,
Right.
by I'm paying a larger percentage of my benefits and I'm getting
Mhm.
less income overall because they're shifting the responsibility to the worker. So in
So
that kind of
that
situation, what are you supposed to do as an employee?
Well, and that's the whole thing. It's one of those things where you have to be aware of it. And that's where the emergency fund as a line of first defense really comes in, but you have to calculate it. So it used to be way back when that they would say 3 to 6 months, that should be sufficient. Well, no, now we're thinking about if you're a homeowner, what's your emergency fund for the house? Well, it's got to be at least that deductible, right? Okay. So that's part of the calculation that you need to have on cash on hand. So an emergency fund is cash on hand. It is a cash holding. You're not going to make a lot of money on it, but you got to be able to get out of it in less than 3 days, 1 to 2 days top. Okay. You need to be able to put your hands on that. All right. So that emergency fund is part of it. The deductible for your car, that's an issue. Okay. You need to be able to pay for that without pain. And then the key is when you have an issue like this, is you pay the deductible, you pay for the issue, you recover, and then you take cash and you resupply and you reseed that emergency account, that emergency fund. So there's the deductible for the house, the deductible for the car. If you're putting money away in the HSA, that becomes the emergency fund for healthcare expenses. Okay. And then you have to look about replacing income for a period of time. And that's another calculation. So, one of the things I'll say to people is how long would it take for somebody with your experience and your salary requirements to replace your position should something happen? And that's a very, very, very tough question for people to face because they're like, why would anything happen? Well, okay, sometimes things happen. If things went south, how long would it take for you or somebody just like you with your experience to make the same amount of money? And that is a question of, you look at that and you say, okay, what are my expenses? What do I have to pay each month to keep going? Whether it's the mortgage, the rent, the taxes, the insurance, all of these things. And that becomes part of the calculation for the emergency fund. That's the financial defense. Now, when people get older and they get closer to retirement, or what I like to call when every day is Saturday, okay, I want people to fill that in. When every day is Saturday, I will blank. But as you get closer and closer to that, one of the things that I will encourage people to think about is expanding out of the emergency fund. Why? Because if something happens and you leave your job early, okay, or you retire earlier than expected, if we have cash on hand, we can sort of ride it out and we don't have to put undue stress on the investments. So, what it does is it gives us flexibility. If the market takes a downturn like 2008, which you mentioned, my clients back in 2008 that had cash on hand, had controlled for their debt, okay, and were close to retirement or in retirement and maybe had Roth accounts, were in a better position to ride it out and let their investments recover than people who didn't. Why? Because they didn't have to cash out on those investments long before, when they were at their bottom. They could
Mhm.
let the accounts recover.
Try to come back. Yeah.
Okay. So all of the things, the way I tell people is before we even get to the investments, we want to look at the structure of where you are and what you're doing. Are you using the financial system and the tools available to you to actually maximize your control regardless of what happens around you?
For
Those
this
are the financial
emergency
differences.
fund, I guess the question is like, How do you keep a robust emergency fund that doesn't get tax heavy?
Well, that's the whole thing. If you're putting it in for cash, okay, and it's a cash account, what happens with that is you are a minimizing your fees and you're not making a heck of a lot in interest at this point. Okay. So the goal is not necessarily to earn a great return on it, although I don't like seeing people not earn money. Okay. That's the last thing on earth I want people to do, but I want people to understand something. Every account has a goal. Every goal has a time horizon, and time horizon has two parts in it. Okay. Time until the goal, time inside of the goal. And then every account and every goal has a risk tolerance. And the risk tolerance for your cash is extremely low.
Hmm.
When I need money as an emergency and it's an unforeseen thing, quite frankly, I need money.
You need liquid. You may be able to get it. Like you don't want to have to take
Moving.
3 months to get it. You want to be able to get it like yesterday.
Correct. Okay. And that's the whole piece of it. That's what the emergency fund is. So it's a cash on hand issue, and that's a constant calculation. So it's not such an easy thing, except for the fact that I want people to understand there's nothing here they can't learn. It's just a question of mastering the tools.
And the medical debt can all be in the HSA,
Right.
so that's not going to get taxed.
Right. Okay. But again, within the HSA, you want to have cash inside of it. Once you get to a certain point with the HSA, you can invest in it.
Hmm.
But that requires investing for your risk tolerance, and keep in mind that you still do need cash. In the
Yeah,
HSA, you need cash to cover, for example, the deductible in cash without having to wait for the market to open to sell it off and for everything to clear.
yeah. So your
You get it.
HSA, like if you've got like let's say you had because I had at one time a $14,000 family deductible,
Wow.
right? And I had a really bad plan at work. It was
Hmm.
making me pay $2,200 a month for coverage.
Wow.
And that's
Wow.
the kind of thing I'm talking about with the industry today. So that made it very hard to save any money
Oh, absolutely.
because if you got to pay that, and then my wife ended up getting cancer,
Oh my
right?
God. I'm so
Then you
sorry.
end up having deductibles. So I mean, you can try to plan for stuff, but if your employer shifts the responsibility to you
Yeah, it's
and then
awful.
doesn't give you the money, I mean, that's the kind of thing like where I'm saying the employee in some situations is not being given as good a deal as we got back in '94 or
Right.
'95.
And that's something that we all need to face. And that's really a conversation, slightly different conversation that we need to have. And it's just because things were promised to us doesn't necessarily mean that that's how that has worked out. So I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I just saying sometimes there are situations where if you don't have like like you can have the best intentions to try to do stuff, but if like the way the marketplace is working for the worker and
Right.
the way the situation is working with the medical industry, like my wife got hit with maybe $500,000 worth of bills, and I had
Oh,
to come up with like 15,000 worth of deductibles.
ouch.
That's not something that you anticipate all the time, or you might have thought your insurance was better than what it was supposed to be. But when, insurance tends to be something that until you have to do it, you might not realize what they're going to cover. So
Right.
what you're talking about is really important because I've actually lived through it. And I know I'm in a better position. But what I'm saying is like sometimes like you could have kind of blue sky it and think you have coverage and think people are because I've got coverage through work. And then what they gave you isn't that good.
I'm so sorry. I'm glad this is in your rearview mirror, but you're not the first to go through this, and it's awful. And this is the thing that I tell people. It's like, look, I had a colleague who got sick at 33 and was dead by 36, a former colleague, and I had to go to a funeral. I had another colleague who got into former colleague who wound up in a motorcycle accident, didn't make it at age 26. So the reality is, unfortunately, these things happen. I have another client who is not expected to make it after, going through her own battle. I have so much respect for these people. I wish they were still here. And that's the piece. It's like it's not just death, it's illness, it's all of these different things that can happen. My colleague who died at 36, she was very, very sick for 3 years. And she had thankfully used the system to provide for herself, and there were others who helped augment it. A really rough road. And again, it's really a question of being aware as soon as possible and doing the best you can to use the system that you have in front of you to get what you need. Okay. I love it when when employers, yes, they offer a high deductible plan. They take it down as far as they possibly can with it. And then they help seed the HSA, that they contribute to it. I love that. And it's so much better than the other accounts, the FSA, because what the client can do, what the individual employee can do, is they can take that money with them.
Yeah.
Okay. And
That's a
I
better.
want them as much as they can to use that system. So use the HSA, understand and use the insurance properly. I'll never forget, I was talking to a former colleague and we were talking about car insurance. And he mentioned the level of coverage that he had. And I kind of looked at him and I said, wait, why? Why do you have just barely above state minimum? You know better. He said, yeah, I do. I just don't want to spend the money. I said, did you ask? Okay. He doubled his coverage for $12 more a month.
Yeah, it's kind of a no-brainer because, like, if you like, I live around Boston, right, and
Yeah.
kind of famous for like uninsured drivers in certain sections, right, and just hitting you and then disappearing. And my dad was an insurance agent in
Okay.
Boston. He used to have to run into the situation where these people would just hit you and run away.
Right.
And it's like he was an insurance agent. He had max coverage on his car because he's out there. And he was always telling people, it's like you don't understand. It's like you can think you're the best driver in the world, and like you can't avoid somebody that's like that.
Right. And we all, I mean, wow. And it's just we all have those stories and we've all had those experiences where it's like this was not somebody's fault. And again, oftentimes when it comes to a disability event, it's not anybody's fault. Nobody asked for these things to happen. Nobody put 99 times out of 100, they did not put themselves in a position where this was going to happen. Okay. So plan for it. Okay. Plan for it. And the way I look at it is I said, look, everybody has their own risk tolerance for this. However, I've seen this happen enough times where people didn't plan for it. And the other thing that I was going to tell you is it really isn't just about income. I've seen people with high incomes not put anything away, not control their consumption, defer it, put some of that money to work for them, give that money a job, okay, a goal. And because they didn't do that, when they wound up with a situation like unforeseen retirement early, okay, or illness, I've seen this over and over again where they've had a real problem because of it. Now, I know one case many years ago, I had a referral. I had two referrals right at the start of my career. One of them was a doctor and he had been married. He had children, quite a few children, and he wound up with a stroke. That really caused a problem. Thank God for the long-term disability insurance that he had. Okay. I also had another client that was referred to me, and it was a family couple that had a daughter who was born with several significant disabilities. Okay. And she was never going to be independent. When that happened, he sold his business and went to work running a business for a family of brothers who didn't like each other, so he ran the business for them. And his wife worked as a civil servant. Well, guess what? They had made the commitment when they first got married that one income they would live off one income and they would invest the other. So even though neither one of them ever earned a lot of money, they controlled down their spending, controlled down their lifestyle. Other than their house, they never carried debt. You would never look at their cars and think that they had the money they had. But when they retired early in their 50s, they had quite a bit of assets that rolled over. And they had that mindset. That millionaire next door mindset is very real. Yes, income helps. It absolutely helps. Earn as much as you can. Okay. Legally, lawfully, ethically, do what you can to make money. However, okay, it's not just about what you earn. It's what you keep at the end of the day and what you use to transition to build out your wealth. And it's how equipped you are, both mentally, because you'll never go anywhere that your mind hasn't gone first. It's how equipped you are to manage it and understand it, and how you use the system legally and consistently for your long-term benefit.
Yeah, I think a lot of times people, we're kind of living in a consumer-based, you know, mindset where people, their car represents like their image. Their clothes represent the image. The house represents the image. So like that have gone above what they can really do.
Hmm.
So if you get the McMansion, you get the Lexus, you get this, you get that. You're so much consumerism that even though you're making money, you're expending so much of that money that you're not really planning.
Right.
And if you're planning, maybe you're planning like with blockchain or Bitcoin, and it's like that might not be the best idea. And so like even your ideas are kind of like you're doing too many things that are high risk. Like if
Right.
everything's high risk and you're not having, everything, I'm a Buddhist, is about balance. So if
Okay.
you have like balance, like you have some things that could be high risk and some things moderate, some things what, so you have kind of a balanced life. And you
Correct.
don't go if you don't go to extremes, then you tend to do, in our perspective, you tend to do better, pretty well, because if you're running at the edge, then you kind of burn out.
Right. Right. But it's again, thank you for mentioning the risk tolerance. When I talk to people and they say that they want no risk in their life, okay, that doesn't work either. And
Yeah,
especially when it comes to financial considerations, we can mitigate for risk, meaning I can turn around and say, all right, with risk, we can do a few things. And this is just life. You can avoid it. I can say that I'm never going to drive again. That doesn't work in my world. I live in Texas. Okay. That wouldn't work at all. You can say, I'm going to avoid driving, or I'm going to, let's say I'm going to mitigate it, but I'm going to wear a seatbelt. I'm going to have a car with airbags. Okay. I'm going to drive the speed limit. Good luck in Texas. Okay. There are lots of things you can do to mitigate it. I can take the risk onto myself and not carry insurance. Well, that's not lawful in the state of Texas, so don't do that. Okay. You really have to think about it. What's the risk of driving? Is it bodily injury? So I can do different things. I can change my driving behavior. I can do those things. Is it the financial risk? Please don't violate the law. You need to carry insurance. Make sure it's adequate. But, okay, but I have to drive. So again, we have to pick and choose our considerations. Okay. How are we going to move? I mean, risk is something that we have to constantly be aware of. And one of the things I talk about in the Wealth Academy is understanding what risk is, understanding that when a financial professional talks to you, a financial advisor, one of the things we're going to do is we're going to actually ask you, how are you doing? What's going on in your life? What's changed? Tell me about you. Tell me about your family. Tell me about your job. Tell me about your business. Why am I asking those questions? It's not just because I like my people and I want to find out what's going on with them. I want to understand if anything has shifted their risk tolerance. So if there's something going on in their lives and it's presenting some red flags and some major challenges, then the first thing I'm going to think about is, are the defenses intact? And what do I need to do to shore up those defenses? Or do I need to be prepared for something to come up? Or the next question is there a planning issue that we need to address? Or the next question is beyond that is, then I'm talking to the portfolio manager and saying, okay, we need to talk to them about the risk they're carrying. And then you need to make some decisions along with the client about what's going on with their money and their investments. Again, that's another discussion. But one of the things that I really do encourage people to do is to understand your risk isn't carved into stone. Psychologists may turn around and say, no, your tolerance for risk is established in your childhood. Not necessarily. From a financial professional point of view, I need to know what's going on, because there are going to be times when you're going to be much more comfortable with risk and times when you're not. The closer you get to retirement, not so much. But yet, on the other hand, if we're not investing in different asset classes, and if we're only taking a zero risk approach or a very low risk approach, you run the risk of running out of money, okay, throughout the rest of your lifetime. That's another thing that I hear from people. They're like, oh, I'm not going to live past 80. Okay, well, statistically, I can't plan for that. We need to actually understand that unless you have something currently within your own medical issues, okay, your medical history and your track record, I need to plan statistically for you to live between the ages of 95 and 99.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the objective is to make sure you don't outlive your money. That's part of it. Okay, one of the things I'll talk to people about is, how much can you deplete from your portfolio? That's another conversation. But again, it's all about the risk tolerance. It's all about understanding it. And from the Academy's point of view, we're not going to talk to you about the individual investments. What we're talking to you about is literally learning how to understand the system, manage the system, and develop instincts over time. Confidence can't be taught, but I can walk you through and help you learn the knowledge, process it through over time, shift your mindset so that you develop confidence and the instincts so that you can make decisions as time goes on. And that as your wealth grows and that as things happen, you can make decisions from a position of knowledge and confidence and instincts and be able to hang on and have the tenacity. The defenses give you the tenacity to hang on to get to where you want to go and ride out any turbulence you have.
Seems like your focus on the defenses is a good strategy, and I haven't really heard a lot of financial planners focus on that as much as you have.
The way I look at it is, okay, there's a phrase, if any road will get you there, you have to decide where you're going, or else any road is going to get you there, and you may not like where you're going to land at the end. Okay. So I want people to choose a destination, and then I want people to get really, really honest with themselves. Where are they right now? And how badly do they want to go where they say they want to go? Because then what we can do is we can build pathways from work backwards and figure out what we need to do and where we need to shift. But again, it's how badly do you want it? And when I think about the defenses, I think about this. When we talk about resilience, what does resilience mean to you?
I think I'm a cancer survivor, so resilience to me is actually being able to get up every day.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm at age 27, I had a level 3 sarcoma.
Oh,
So
wow.
I have a different perspective, like knowing that my life expectancy is not at the top. Because I'm a cancer survivor, I'm more likely not to go past like 75.
Okay. But you know what?
So
You're still here, and let's just plan on you being here.
yeah,
Tomorrow's
I'm
never
just saying,
promised for any of us.
yeah, but I mean that's kind of like fact. But for my oncologist, but so the idea is like part of my strategy also is to be able to live a life that where I can actually enjoy because I know I can actually, going through a terminal illness and a potential terminal illness, you don't always think you have as much time, right? So part of what done is like, I ended up living in Japan for 2 years.
That's awesome.
So I started to do things that maybe I would have thought, well, maybe I shouldn't do that because I like look at me, time is important to me, might be more than money. So like in
Okay.
terms of like being able to experience certain things in my life, like more in the next 5 years than 20 years from now because of certain mindset. But that's like given where you are. Like you have to kind of know who you are, what you are, where you are in your life, what your medical condition is, to decide what your risk tolerance is, what you're going to do, and
Exactly.
what you're going to be.
So
Because
the way,
sometimes, you don't always have as much time as you think you have.
well, I'm glad you're here. And quite frankly, tomorrow isn't promised for anybody. And that's something, I mean, it's a very weird feeling when you realize that colleagues that you help train and who are younger than you are no longer with you. Okay. So for me, that's been a real lesson. Tomorrow's not promised. But I love the fact that you're a survivor. Okay. I really do. And I respect it. And I'm so glad you're here. But I also have to tell you that I think your definition of resilience is perfect. Resilience is getting back up. When you've gotten knocked down, it's getting right back up. Okay. And getting back up to start point. And the fact that you kept getting up each day and you put one foot in front of the other is exactly the image I want people to take. That's the lesson. Okay. And financial resilience is the same thing. You get knocked down, you get right back up. All right. You wind up being sick, not being able to work for a couple of years, you then come, or a year, you come back up and you restart your life. You don't get to the point where you've been financially wiped out because of the disability insurance and because of the medical emergency fund of the HSA. You turn around and you're back up to starting point. You're able to move forward. You're not back in a hole. You haven't been knocked down. But the advantage is that's resilience. Anti-fragility is something different. Anti-fragility is where you take the stress and the pain, or when you think about it, sort of the spiritual fire of whatever you've gone through, and you allow it to forge you into something stronger. And so one of the things I'll talk to people about is when we do our program, the framework is psychologically gratitude, resilience. What do you need emotionally and mentally to be resilient? But then also, what do you need strategically and financially to be resilient, to get back up those financial defenses? And then the instincts, which I've talked about, learning the system, learning how this works, understanding your emotions, understanding your thought process with money, making those shifts so that you can actually, and living those shifts so that they become healthier patterns, become your fallback position. And then the tenacity is the ability to hang on, to hold on. All right. That's that structure with it. That's that grit. Anti-fragility comes in at that point when you say, okay, there's turbulence in the market. I'm in a position where I can take advantage of it. I see certain things that I can take advantage of. Okay. I'm in a position where financially I can use my structure to advance myself and my family even forward. Okay. And that's where I want people to go. I want them to become so comfortable with the system and develop those instincts, the tenacity, the resilience, and the gratitude, that positive attitude, that belief that they can move forward, to be able to become anti-fragile, to be able to be like people that I've seen, regular people who had incomes you wouldn't think would generate the wealth that they've built. Because they had the framework down, they were able to build it out. And I've seen it happen. I've seen people do it. So I really want to encourage people to think that they can do it, as opposed to being convinced that they cannot.
Well, I think if you think about like just being smart about money is we're such a consumer or oriented society, but like when you save at any level, if you start making that part of your DNA, right? If you start saying, I should set aside this for this, my
Right.
rainy day fund, my emergency fund, my college fund, my retirement, you start thinking about not
Yep.
just like, what am I going to buy today?
Yeah.
Like, what vacation am I going to go to? Like, you spend all your money going to Europe or going to France or going to Miami or doing these, but like, would it be, not that you don't want to experience life, like part of it, I think is like time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to me, I might not, I have a day job, I'm in software design, but I make sure I have enough time to do my podcast and do my music. I'm a musician, I'm a producer. I have other things out in my plate. I wear other hats. So to me, having time to do music or podcasting or art is important to me, right? And I actually would rather actually set aside time to do those things than I have my other thing to make my money.
See, but that's the whole piece of it. What are you willing to give up? What are your priorities? And that's why I ask people, how badly do you want it? You want your time to do the things that matter to you. And so you're willing to give up other things in order to do those things. So, the podcasting is important, the music is important, the production is important. All of those things are important enough for you to give time to it. Time is the one resource we're never going to get back. So we have to make the most out of it. Okay. And that's the piece of it. We need to not take any piece of it for granted. What am I going to do with my time? What am I going to do with the gifts I have in front of me? And time is the biggest one. So I love your attitude and I think it's ideal. And in economics, we talk about opportunity cost. So to if I choose to go out for dinner, I'm choosing to give up all the other things I could use that money for. Okay. If I'm choosing to invest in my technology, what am I giving up for that? I'm giving up maybe discretionary income. Maybe I'm giving up buying something, whatever. Okay. But for me, if I'm investing in tools that I can use to, let's say, participate in a podcast, okay, do my work, interface with other people, if I'm investing in software that helps me deliver my program, that's an investment because I'm using it to build something that will pay me and will provide.
Yeah. It's an
Okay.
investment. Like if any artist is like you invest in your equipment, like your piano, your guitar, your amps, like all the stuff. Like in order to play to write the music, you have to have this. You have to have your instrument, and then you have
Right.
to have. So there's a podcast. I got the mic, the cameras, I got the computer, I got the services, I got stuff to do SEO. I have to. There's certain things I have to have
Right.
to do what I'm doing, and it's an investment. But over time, what happens is like your podcast gets a higher ranking, you get more guests, you get more, you get more opportunities. Other people find out about you. You get more, you just it ends up being this kind of Rolodex opportunity. Like every podcast you do gives you another opportunity because somebody might have listened and then suddenly they come to you and they want to be on the show. So
That's
you
awesome.
keep on getting bookings because you made the investment. So it
Right.
becomes like suddenly you went from 4 bookings, 4 years ago a month to 20 bookings a month, you
That
know.
is awesome.
So
You've earned
if
it.
you, yeah, so that's what you do because it's like you got to take the time to show up. Like my grandpa's a coal miner. He's like, every day I got to show up in the mine because
Right.
that's what I got to do. It's like I always took that as like he was a hardworking guy. Like every day he showed up and he, took care of 9 kids.
That's amazing.
So I mean that to me was like the work ethic. So
Hmm.
you put the work in and things will happen. And so like it's like putting the work in, doing the job. If you show up, you'll get dividends just from doing that investment of your time.
See, and that's the piece that gets to me. That's what an investment is when it comes to time, and you're investing in your skills and you're investing in your trade and you're investing in all the different things you do. And that's so critical. I want people to see that with their money. Money is literally just a set of tools in your hands. You need different tools. You need different tools in different places. Okay. So you may have a toolbox in your car, you may have a toolbox in your garage. I know I have a little toolbox thing in my kitchen that I use, inside the house. Different tools in different places do different things. It's the same thing with money. It's the exact same thing with money. And, just like when I was a kid, my mother signed me up for shop. Okay. Believe it or not, like wood shop. Okay. We were building wood boxes and stools and things like that. I was like one of the few girls with like pigtails in there learning how to use a saw. I'm going to admit, I was scared. I was absolutely scared. There were times when I really didn't like using sanding and I sanded my own skin and it wasn't fun, but I learned. Okay. And so, what I want people to understand is you have to overcome the fear. It's a set of tools and it has to be used to produce something. It's in economics what we call an intermediate good, it's used in the production of something else. I've had certain people tell me that a Louis Vuitton bag is an investment. Okay. It's not. Now, there are some people for whom it could be. Some people for whom they literally use it as part of what they need to make money.
Yeah.
That works as long as you can show me how it pays you. Now, one
How
of
you
the things
flip
I'll tell people,
it? Can you
right,
flip it or
and this
not?
is this is another financial planning thing, okay, from the planning side, not on the investment side. Your house that you live in is not an investment. It's the roof over your head. Okay. I want you to understand that it's the roof over your head. It doesn't pay you. It's there to put a roof over your head. Okay. Now, if you're investing in real estate for investment purposes, that's a totally different conversation. All right. So understand that, yes, it may be the largest thing you buy and it may be the biggest thing you buy. And I understand what, that's the thing. That's the thinking that my mother was raised with. So for example, we know that 80% of the population is considered financially illiterate by the industry. The system is complicated. There's lots of structure to it. And unfortunately, because we're 4 to 5 generations in to this problem, people are not learning what they need to learn. So my mother did her best to give us this knowledge but she didn't come from a family where it was there. So she didn't understand what disability insurance was. She didn't understand certain account types. She learned eventually, okay, but it took a lot of time. That's kind of the way it works. It's not anybody's fault that they're in this position. The question is, okay, if you're in this position and you don't know, what are you going to do about it? You don't have to stay there. You're not a tree. You're not planted. You don't have roots. You can move. You can move forward. You can learn this. You just have to decide to overcome the fear and learn. And it's interesting about this in terms of the learning process. But part of why I'm doing what I'm doing is because I really want to put the power back in other people's hands so that they can learn what they need to learn and do what they need to do. I want people to have control over their own lives. And to do that, part of that is learning how to control the money that they have.
Yeah, financial literacy, I think, is real important because, it's just like overall just literacy and reading comprehension. I'm a liberal arts major, but the idea of, learning to learn.
Yep.
Some people think they get their degree, their high school degree, they get whatever they get, their associate's degree, and then they think that's it. And the thing is, the world we live in, this kind of AI, automated, robotic future world, is dependent on people who are critical thinkers
Mm-hmm.
and people who actually are kind of not what we're trained in school. I mean, our schools were trained for agricultural and factory workers.
Can I
People
tell
who
you a
sit in
story
the
about
car.
schools? Can I tell you a story about schools? I have to tell you this. So, about 14 years ago, my oldest was in middle school in a charter in Arizona. And I sort of asked them, do you want me to teach a class on what I called economic and financial literacy? And they said, sure, come on in. Well, the head of the middle school didn't want me there. That's a long story. But the overall head of the school said, no, we're going to do this. So I went in there, and during the first class, they had all of the seventh and eighth graders together. So there were, I think, 40, 50 kids, equally divided between girls and boys. And I walked in there, did a little academic thing for about 5 minutes, realized nobody was processing anything. So they had this huge, long wall, floor to ceiling whiteboards. So I turned to the kids and I said, tell me everything you want in your lives. And I wrote it, everything they said, I wrote up on the board. Now, at first, it was pretty much equal between the men and the women, the boys and the girls. And the boys had typical stuff that you would expect. The girls were able to describe in great detail the clothing, the furs, the bags, the houses, the furniture, the artwork, the trips. A couple of them described the aircraft. You get the idea. All right, the sailboats, the sail yachts, all of it. And right in the center of the room was a little popular boy and girl. Okay, like the queen being queen, the king and queen of the class. And they were cute and they were sitting together. And when we finished covering the walls, I turned to the classroom and I said, all right, how are you going to pay for it? Dead silence. Dead silence. Okay. So this one little girl, popular girl, turned around and said, I'm going to marry somebody who's going to buy it for me. And the boy sitting next to her, I swear to God, he looked at her like she had changed in front of his eyes. Okay. And his whole body shifted and he shifted his chair with it. And he turned away from her and he said, good luck with that. And then that became a whole conversation. So the head of the middle school was sitting in the back of the room, curled up in a ball, laughing. He was laughing so hard he was shaking, but he didn't want the noise to come out.
Mm-hmm.
So flash forward about a week, I come back and I had this whole thing planned out. And I walked in the room and there were these frappuccinos sitting out on the counter, or some sort of cold drink. I think they were fraps, and I think they were relatively new. And I talked to them and I said, all right, how much are these? Tell me about them. and I think they were like $4, and they were talls. They were very not tall, like they were big
Mhm.
servings. And I turned to the girls and I said, "Tell me about these." They told me they're like $4 or $5. I said, "Okay. How much did it? How much did your parent? Did you pay for this yourself? Did you earn the money to buy these, or did someone give you the money?" Now, some of the kids worked and had babysitting jobs, but they were not the ones with the frappuccinos.
Mhm.
Okay. By and large, the girls who didn't work were the ones who had the fraps. And I said, "Okay, so how much money did it take for your parents to give you the money to buy the frap?" They said $4 or $5, whatever it was. I said, "No, no, 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 no. Let's talk about those. There's federal tax, there's income tax, there's employment tax, there's Arizona state tax, income tax, there's sales tax. How much did it cost?" And they looked at me dumbfounded. Then it got even better because I turned to them and I said, "All right, is this a necessity? Is this a want or a need?" They had never heard that phrase before and had never heard the question, never thought of it that way. I said, "Okay, let's explain. Let's go a little bit further in this. The roof over your head, that has to be paid for first. Transportation that your family uses, including gasoline, power at home, water at home, okay? Things to keep the house clean and safe and put together. The clothes on your body, the shoes on your feet, the food you eat. Then there's this. How much money does it take for your parents to have the $4 or $5 that they can give you so that you can buy that frap?" Absolute dead silence. I can't tell you how many of the parents thanked me for that. They thanked me for actually walking the kids through that. And so many of them didn't have the education formally to be able to do that with their kids. And so they didn't feel confident doing that with their kids. And that's part of the educational process. Now, I don't know that I think it's appropriate for the teachers to do it. I think it's unfair. I think we put too much of a burden on the teachers, but we do have to find a way to get this into the hands of kids and people as young as possible.
Yeah, I think we just like with civics, we people need to know how to be like citizens in terms
Mhm.
of like social etiquette because of all the going on, the bullying on social media. So I think people like along with like financial literacy and just like being a somebody who's a citizen that's like understands like you're in a community and
Right.
there's certain things that are like social etiquette, right? And then financial responsibilities. Because a lot of times, like we're just given all these messages
Yeah.
from coming all over the place, all this noise, and then people aren't getting any kind of compass to understand that like there's kind of like a balance. Like I said, there's a balance,
Right.
and a lot of people are kind of maybe too far to this side, too far to that side, and they're not getting the full picture of
So wait,
everything they need.
when I started on this journey of creating the programs that I've created, I had to sort of map this out. And what I mapped out was an image. And it was okay. I believe that we are created to be responsible. What does that mean? We are able to choose how we respond. I apologize for my crazy barking dog. But the point is, at the top of that, okay, we are created to be responsible. How does that manifest? It manifests in our physical body, how we take care of ourselves, okay? And health and how you take care of yourself physically and physical training, that is really a great framework through which to view everything else. You start off with function, health, move to fitness, and then to performance. Well, you can say that about your physical health, but you can also say that about your emotional health. You can then say that about your intellectual health. You're responsible for what you think. You're responsible for what you know. How do you know what you know? Challenge it. Read the other opinion. Read and talk to somebody who disagrees with you. Challenge what you think because you're responsible for what you think and how you feel and how that leads you to act. Finances, the financial piece is the fourth rung. So there's like four corners on this pillar, okay, that really affect your ability to choose your freedom. We were created to be free Freedom is a flip side for responsible. So when you choose to be free, you choose to be responsible, you choose to be independent of other people's control. You're making the choice. Okay. And you have to take care of those four little corners to be able to hold the whole thing up.
Yeah, there's a lot of pillars to like, being in the world, and a lot of times people maybe focus on one pillar or two
Hmm.
pillars, and they lose sight. They might, have six pack abs, and they say, "Well, I'm great physical condition," but then they don't have a good psychological health,
Right.
or they've got bad financial health, or they forget about the other pieces, and so they focus on one, and it looks outwardly looks okay, but then it's like you said, it's like if you don't have all the pillars, then you kind of out of alignment,
Well,
and
and I agree with you on that. And I think that that's a danger. Again, your approach is really healthy. It's all about balance. I would argue that you cannot go anywhere physically, intellectually, emotionally, or financially that your mind hasn't gone before. So work on the mental health pieces. And to really take care of the mental health, you also have to take care of yourself physically. Okay. So that's all part of it. And once you start doing that, you can start working on the thought process and the financial pieces.
mhm.
We're all works and processes. We're all works in progress. We're all walking in a journey. We're not expected to be perfect. Perfection is never the goal. It's never the goal. You are going to get knocked down. That is part of life. That's part of the reason why I talk about the defenses. You're never going to not need them. Okay. The question is how much of a defense, where's your defense, and how are you going to use it? But the whole point is, I want you to always have the ability to get back up, return to set point, get stronger, and move forward.
Right,
That's the goal.
I want to say that. I mean, that's a good place to probably end our conversation. But I want to let people know that we do have your URL,
Mhm.
harmonywealthacademy.com. That'll be fully clickable. Is that how people get in touch with you?
Yeah, it is, but they could also send an email to me, which is at well, it's Monica M. Kaufman, M as in Mary, my last name, Kaufman, at harmonyam.com. And I'd love to hear from everybody. And please let me know what you think. And if you have questions, send them to me. I'd love to hear
Yeah, and that's fully clickable. Like we were just on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. And
them.
in the podcast description, that your harmonywealthacademy.com is fully clickable. And then you just mentioned your email. People will be able to, put that, type that up and send you that email. I do
Yep.
appreciate the time you took with us today. There's a lot of great nuggets of information that we got today in terms of financial plan. I hadn't really heard this perspective, but I think it was really illuminating, and I do appreciate it. I think the audience will appreciate it, and I want to thank you for being a guest on the Family Electric Coach podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a total pleasure. And I love the fact that you've shared your story. Thank you for the gift of that. Thank you for the gift of your time.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks. Take care.